Behold, a gateway to your own past, if you wish.
I heard Captain Preston, plain as day. Damn your butts, he said. You won't treat me this way. Then he told the soldiers to fire.
And how would you describe the behavior of these young lads just before the soldiers fired?
Throwing snowballs.
History's strange, it's alien, and it won't give us what we would like to have.
The McPherson Financial Group brings you hour 3 of our Tuesday morning on this 12th of July, 2022. If it's Tuesday, it must be Dave Does History. Dave Bowman joins us from Silverdale, Washington, as we get into a little look at history. Headline at BillMick.com today. Brevard Public School slide. We ended up talking that in hour number 2. Plus, the whole day's been about a cultural shift or shifts, I guess, in our culture, from everything from churches to workplace to schools to Dave Bowman, now the media. And I guess I'm wondering, based on the topic material you've thrown in front of us today, is it really as much of a shift as we might have thought it was? Good morning, buddy.
My grandfather, good morning. My grandfather of blessed memory used to say this all the time to me, quote, "There's nothing new under the sun," unquote. Mm-hmm. And I used to think he was this brilliant philosopher until I realized he was just quoting the Bible.
Yeah.
Which might make him a brilliant philosopher. I don't know.
That's true.
But yeah. The reality of our world is that, well, being in conservative talk radio, you know this, we don't trust the media. In fact, I've heard calls to your show about how people, they don't just not trust the media. They, what's the word for it? Oh, yeah, hate the media.
And believe it's complicit in a lot of the agenda driving that's going on across the country.
Of course they do. No, the question is, why do they believe that? What is it that's caused them to believe that the media is, and by the media, that's even too broad of a term. What are we talking about? Because we're media.
Mm-hmm.
Do they hate us?
Some do.
Some do.
Not our audience, but some do.
Right, but you could say the same thing about CNBCs, couldn't you? There's 700,000 people that watch CNBC and they don't hate it. So what is it that causes us to not either trust or like the media? If you had to guess, what would it be?
It would be our evaluation of their performance and how they present what they're claiming to be news.
Okay, but weather people get the weather report wrong virtually every day. Do we hate them?
Some do.
In fact, there's one weather person up here that I tune in for just to watch her do the weather. So
I got the same thing here. Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't care if she's wrong or not. I just want to watch her do the.
She's talking. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I could turn the sound off and put the radio on. It wouldn't matter. I'm always curious about this because conservative opinion today, particularly talk, because this is what we deal with most of the time. The opinion of the media, as you said, is they hate it. They think it's full of left-wing propagandists who are carrying water for the Democrat Party. But the really fascinating thing to me, Bill, is if you sit down with a leftist and you start talking about the media, you know what you're going to hear in many cases?
The same thing.
That the media is just a tool of the right wing and the Republican Party, and it's just carrying water for them, and it's just being, the media for the right wing. And it's remarkable to me.
I've seen those comments, and it's ridiculous, but yeah, I've seen those comments.
It's ridiculous to you and me, but not to them. This is one of my favorite pet theories that I have about how is it that two people can look at exactly the same words on the page. I don't care if you're talking about the media, the Bible, the Constitution, pick a law. Two people can look at exactly the same words on a piece of paper and come to the completely polar opposite conclusions about what it means.
Dude, I saw it as a policeman in describing bad guys by witnesses. Guy could be 6'3" and white, and he'd come back as, 5'8" and Hispanic. You just didn't know. And two witnesses see the same thing, and they couldn't give you a consistent description in a lot of cases.
Why do you think that is? What causes that?
Poor perception.
Or how about pre-existing biases?
Which would translate to poor perception. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm with you there. Sure.
The thing about all this is, and the remarkable thing about media bias and how people feel about the media is, this is nothing new. This has been going on literally since before there was a United States. This whole media bias and media use as propaganda has a long history in these here United States.
So it's not anything that's really new under the sun.
Not at all.
And we're back in 60 seconds. Dave Bowman. Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. We continue in a minute on 92.7 FM, WMMB. Yesterday's call of the day was Steve in Palm Bay as he tied two of our topics together with his commentary. Could be you as we look for a call of the day every day on the show. Dave Bowman with us. Dave Does History. Media bias, not a new thing. Dave, you've got some examples, I would presume.
One of the seminal events in our country, you can't pick up an American history textbook without reading about what happened March 5th, 1773, a very snowy day in Boston that day. And things were kind of tense in Boston, as you know, in the 1770s. Things were, we were kind of mad at the lobster backs, as we called them. And a bunch of soldiers had been sent to guard a local place there. And a crowd had gathered to harass the soldiers. Kind of like somebody sent out a tweet saying, hey, if you know where the redcoats are, send us a tweet. And if they're still there in 30 minutes, we'll send you some money. They didn't do
we'll
that.
pay you $200. Yeah, right. Why not?
They didn't do that, but it was the same kind of thing.
Or going to a school board member's house and protesting outside. Yeah, we've seen that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the same kind of thing happens. This crowd gathers outside this stuff. They're throwing snowballs at the soldiers. They're being verbally abusive, as only New Englanders can be. And
still to this day.
Yeah. Something happened, and nobody really knows what happened, but shots were fired. And when everything was said and done, 5 Bostonians were dead. And this would go down in history as, quote, the Boston Massacre.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a rallying point for patriots as the evil of the English, the dangers that we face with all of this stuff. Paul Revere, yes, that Paul Revere, a silversmith, would actually design a tea set that was engraved with this whole thing that he put in there, this story of the Boston Massacre. And it becomes something that really unites Americans across the country in their hatred of the British. The American newspapers have glowing, just salacious reports about what happened and how the English soldiers were shooting down Americans in the streets and blah, 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 blah.
So the first American sloganized T-shirt was actually on a tea set.
Yes, it was.
I like it. A little marketing going on, Mr. Revere. Well done.
Yeah, he's quite the genius. Problem, of course, is that is not what happened. And in the subsequent trial, in which the British soldiers were defended by no less than John Adams himself, when the facts came out, it became clear that this was no massacre. This was a terrible event in the snow. It was a mistake in the snow. But the story never gets old, and it never gets retold. In fact, there's almost no coverage of the fact that these men are all acquitted.
I think HBO or Showtime, whoever did the John Adams miniseries, they did it very excellently.
They really did it well. There's several books about it, but the story continues to spread, and it literally becomes the narrative that the British aren't just tyrannical, they're murderous. They are willing to slaughter Americans in the streets to make their point. And depending on where you grew up and went to school, the Boston Massacre is still to this day presented as that kind of event where the British, viciously attacked Americans, peaceful, loving Americans in the streets, and just gunned them down for no reason in an attempt to reestablish British rule in Boston. And for myself, Bill, I was well into my 40s before it ever dawned on me that there might be more to this story. Because every newspaper report, every newspaper that ran a story about it in when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, they took the same story that Paul Revere had told and told us about how the British did all this stuff. They never mentioned the fact that, there was a trial after this and the British were acquitted because they didn't really do anything wrong. We never talk about that. Well, that's how powerful even the early media in America had become when it came to a narrative. This is the narrative we want. The British are bad. The British are tyrannical. The British are evil. They're murderous. They're thugs, whatever. And if you disagreed with that, well, you might find yourself being harassed in the streets and criticized and complained about. The courage that it took John Adams to defend those guys is remarkable, and it's something we never talk about in today's world. We don't even think about it because we don't know about it. But
all these facts, though, they were out there and available to be known. They just weren't considered.
They weren't part of the narrative. They weren't part of the media's campaign.
So the state-controlled media existed before the state actually existed.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it state-controlled, but it certainly was powerful men and patriot-controlled. And useful in many ways.
And it happened before the country ever got founded.
Exactly.
And it still happens today, at least in our perception. And how right is the perception, and how many examples are there in history? Well, Dave Bowman's going to give us a few more as Dave does history on this Tuesday edition of Bill Mick Live. We let you in at some point at 321-768-1240. We'll be seeking a call of the day, and we're diving into the Wayback Machine with Dave Bowman when we continue on Bill Mick Live.
Dave does history, our weekly journey through the Wayback Machine. Dave Bowman is with us on Bill Mick Live.
The McPherson Financial Group bringing you the hour, 321-768-1240, your access to play along. And FloridaJobsNow.com holding that Career Expo Thursday. Happens from noon to 4 at the Canvas Event Center in Orlando. Over 70 recruiters there, some of them actually interviewing on site. You're looking for that next career move, head to FloridaJobsNow.com and get those details. Dave, media perceived as bias, acting in biased manners, but depending on our perception of it, even before the country was founded. And so we move into when the country has been around for a little while, and we've got more examples.
On February 15th, 1898, a little more than 100 years ago, I guess 120 years ago now, doesn't seem that long ago to me, but there you go. To this day, whatever today is, July 12th, 2022, no one actually knows what caused the explosion. There's a lot of theories. My theory is very simply very poor seamanship and very poor storage of materials. The USS Maine, one of the earliest battleships that we built in this country, was sitting in Havana Harbor in Cuba and suddenly just exploded. I mean,
Dave, it was Fidel Castro. Come on.
Yeah, I'm sure. It just blew up and sank and killed about just a little over half the crew died because of what happened. 260 men died ultimately from the explosion and the sinking of the USS Maine. And in an era when it's hard to explain to people the Gilded Age of America, that late 1890s, early 1900 era of America is one of those eras that doesn't make a lot of sense to us today. But there was a theory called manifest destiny, which was this idea that America was destined to essentially rule the world. Now, they didn't look at it quite that way, but that's kind of the way it could be interpreted. And one of the last remaining European colonial powers at that time was Spain, which owned Cuba, the Philippines, Guam, a few other places that may sound familiar to us now. And Spain was easy pickings, as it were, or would have been easy pickings. And so a dedicated newspaper campaign started by William Randolph Hearst led to the accusation that Spain had intentionally and knowingly sank the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. Now, if you ever stop to think about it, you'd go, okay, why in God's name would Spain do that? I mean, if you wanted to start a war with the United States, that's one thing. But based on subsequent events, Spain was not interested in having a war with us, so why would they do this? And the newspapers that Hearst and Pulitzer owned and worked for went on to perform a service known today as yellow journalism. They not only accused Spain of sinking the Maine, remember the Maine, down with Spain? They offered a $500,000 reward in 1898 for the, quote, arrest and conviction of the criminals who did this, knowing full well that nobody did it. It was just the Navy being, the Navy and making mistakes. They completely made up articles. They just made stuff up. Bill, I can't even express to you how much, the word I would use to tell you how much stuff they just made up. I can't say on the air. They just made it up and ran articles after articles after articles about how Spain had attacked America and it was America's duty to destroy Spain.
Let me ask you something. What was the benefit to Hearst Pulitzer over pushing America basically into a war?
Well, there's a good question. What would be the benefit of a newspaper guy? And William Randolph Hearst was more than just a newspaper guy. But first off, war is big business, as you know.
Sure.
And Hearst had a lot of friends in the business of munitions and the likes.
Right.
There's also the element of uniting a country that at the time was not very united. In fact, by 1898, there was still a lot of raw, and I do mean raw, emotions over something that had happened about 40 years before. Remember that?
The Civil War? Yeah.
Yes, the Civil War. In fact, in 1903, there is a reunion at Gettysburg. And so all the troops that fought at Gettysburg on both sides go to Gettysburg. And there's a famous photograph of a Union guy and a Confederate guy shaking hands across the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And I assure you that was the only peaceable moment of that entire event.
Really?
The rest of it was fist fights and arguments. And we still hate you. It was crazy.
That's funny. Absolutely
crazy. So this happens in February. And by August, the United States decides the whole country is whipped up by these reports of how Spain is just, a tyranny and murdering people and blah, blah, blah. And so, of course, we decide to declare war on Spain, all because of Hearst's newspaper articles, which are complete and total fabrications, completely lies. But everybody's happy about this, including a guy by the name of Theodore Roosevelt, who forms his own cavalry company called the Rough Riders.
Mm-hmm.
And they get shipped off to Cuba, where they are going to go into history as the brave Rough Riders, Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders, which, of course, is going to eventually make him such a popular hero that he ends up in the White House of the United States. But do you know who Theodore Roosevelt's commanding officer was?
I do
not. Of course not. Nobody knows. This guy by the name of Joseph Wheeler. Now, Joseph Wheeler is 61 years old in 1898 in Cuba, and he's a general of the U.S. Volunteers at this point. But he is leading the charge up the hill, and as the Spaniards begin to run away, which they already were doing, by the way, he yells out, you ready for this? Joseph Wheeler yells out, "Come on, boys, we've got them damn Yankees on the run again," unquote. Joseph Wheeler is a former Confederate general,
mm-hmm.
now commanding U.S. volunteer troops, including Theodore Roosevelt in Cuba. That's how weird and the necessity of uniting the country has become by 1898, that Hearst and Pulitzer are willing to completely make up a story that will get the United States involved in a war that is so ridiculous that at one point, a Spanish fortress surrenders to a single United States ship that doesn't fire a shot because they don't know they're at war. The ship sails up, says, "Hi, we're here." They send out food saying, "Hey, come on in. We're glad to see you. Hey, Buenavitos, welcome." oh, we're here to capture you. Okay. They didn't even know there was a war going on.
Oh, that's funny.
And this whole thing is because Randolph Hearst turns the sinking of the Maine into just a ridiculous story.
And the McPherson Financial Group bringing you this hour of Bill Mick Live as Dave does history with us. In the news today, recession, inflation, gloom and doom about the economy, especially if you listen to Glenn Beck every morning. He's bringing that news on a daily basis out of sincere concern, I believe. Well, yeah, you want to be concerned, and that means you want to have a plan, and you want to have a plan that's going to get you to that retirement life you've been working hard for all of your working days. Let Art and his staff at the McPherson Financial Group talk you through a transition from whatever plan you're in that may not be working to one that needs to work for you. Reach out to them at 321-253-2016 or online at McPhersonFinancialGroup.com. The McPherson Financial Group, LLC, is a financial services firm offering a broad array of products and services that include insurance and annuities. They're licensed in Florida. I'm compensated for the endorsement, and yeah, they do handle my financial planning. I got to get in and see them, by the way, too. Not that I want to look at the numbers the way they've been, but I want Art and them in touch with it. Dave Bowman with us as we continue. And we're going to take a look at some more modern examples and where all this is taking us, or maybe it's where we've always been. Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live. You want in, we let you in at 321-768-1240 as the McPherson Financial Group makes our hour possible. Also, coming up at 5 after 9, just ahead of Glenn Beck, your first of 9 chances on the day to win $1,000 in our inflation vacation contest. You'll hear that cue to enter. You enter the keyword on the website, and that $1,000 could be yours. That would help offset a little bit of inflation, would it not? Let's get back with Dave Bowman. We're with us every week out of Silverdale, Washington, doing Dave Does History. Dave, what you're telling us is this media has been biased based on your perception one way or the other since media came about, basically.
Well, and this is just 2 examples, the Boston Massacre and the Spanish-American War. And I use war in quotes because technically it was a war. But, you know, it's remarkable to me how you get this, you know, and again, it's perception. On the conservative side, we believe that the liberal media is carrying the water for the liberal and left party. And
I'm not sure we've changed anybody's mind on that today, and I'm not sure I've changed my mind.
Because you won't. Again, the left...
Facts be damned, Dave. I believe what I believe. Come on.
The left believes exactly the opposite. I'm more interested in the question of why we believe that than anything else, and that's where I run into... You know, it's a theological question. Why do people believe what they believe? And
that's a good question. Hey, before we move on and do some recent examples, let me get a call in for you. Jason is in Rockledge. He's talking about this whole thing with the Maine in Cuba. Jason, welcome to the show.
Morning.
What's your question for Dave?
It's simple. It's a simple question. And what's the possibility of the USS Maine blowing up from just simply a static charge? So it was basically an accident.
Well, if you're asking me, I believe that it was an accident. I think the evidence concluded that it was an accident. There was actually an original inquiry that determined that had a mine been the cause of the explosion, they would have seen a column of water. The wind and the weather was calm. There's no electrical cables. There's no dead fish in the harbor, which would have happened had there been a mine. It clearly was, and you know, being a sailor myself, I know that sailors we have procedures and we tend not to follow them, and when we don't follow procedures, bad things happen, and people learn lessons.
Talk about that before, absolutely.
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, in 1974, Admiral Hyman Rickover, the father of the nuclear navy, decided as a hobby he wanted to study the USS Maine, and he actually came to the conclusion that it was coal dust that had detonated, caused the fire, and blew up. And I don't see any reason to not buy into that because it's the most logical thing. It makes sense. Whereas this whole idea that Spain intentionally sank the Maine, A, was completely made up, but B, it makes no sense. You can't there's no scenario you can come up with that would make sense to say to Spain, hey, let's declare war on the United States in 1898. It would have been suicidal.
Were the relationships decent before that?
We didn't like Spain because we felt like they were oppressing Cuba. And remember, by 1898, we had this superiority complex based on our own civil war where we got rid of slavery and oppression and those sorts of things. And following the 1876 election and all of that, we had this kind of, it's our manifest destiny to free the world from tyranny. And we saw Spain as tyranny.
Get another call in before we move on to current events. Line 1, you're on with Dave Bowman on Bill Mick Live.
Good morning, guys. This is Keith of Alcaria, and I often wondered myself why a lot of people on the left, or I used to wonder why a lot of people on the left thought that the media was, always sticking up for the right. And I had this discussion back when I used to bother bantering with leftists, with several different people, one of my neighbors even. And I, would question them, and I'd always get down to, in the end, after the question, okay, well, tell me, who in the media is so in favor of the right wing. And they would basically run off a list of everybody on Fox News. And I would counter with, okay, the entire staff of CNN, the entire staff of MSNBC, those people in their mind, every single time I had this discussion, were perfectly normal. And their entire belief that the media was favoring the right was because Fox News existed. And that happened 6 different times. And I found it absolutely fascinating that one media source could create that type of outlook when the obvious opposite was the reality.
Interesting thought, Keith. Thanks for adding it to the table this morning. I appreciate it. Dave, any reaction before we move on to current events here?
Again, this is what I would say. Obvious to you that that's the case. Now, the argument I would make to that is that reality is what it is. And even people who watch left media recognize the fact that virtually nobody watches left media, whereas Fox News, for reasons, gets a lot of media play. They get a lot of free publicity, and their ratings are better. So if they're the big dog on the block, well, they're carrying water for the right. So the media must be carrying water for the right. QED. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of
pick it all up in just a minute here on Bill Mick Live. You plumbers in the audience, let me ask you, what's your next career move? You satisfied where you are? You think you're paid what you're worth? You think that your work life is worth what you get out of it for your home life? How about going to work for a place where they respect your home life, they respect your family? In fact, they make you part of their family, a respected company with top pay for top plumbers, and they're looking for you. It's Sun Plumbing. Give Kelly a call at 321-725-2460 or see them online at sunplumbing.com. They're looking for experienced plumbers right now. And I'm telling you, they're fantastic folks, and they keep you working in the county, not sending you all over the place, and give you opportunities for training and benefits that are just outstanding. If you're a plumber and you're looking for that next opportunity, Sun Plumbing, one of our sponsors here on Bill Mick Live. Dave Bowman with us. Dave, let's move it into the modern era a little bit and see what we're looking at news-wise today.
So we know that the media can and has manipulated things to some advantage, depending on which side of that you're on. Now, what happens when the media reports what actually happened? This is what happened. But what happened might not necessarily be what really happened. Last week, there was I guess within 3 days after the Dobbs decision, there was an article that appeared in the Indiana Star initially and was soon picked up. And in fact, the president himself repeated this claim that a doctor in Indiana was claiming that Ohio had already banned abortions and that clients were streaming from Ohio to Indiana for quote unquote reproductive care, including, he said, this was a quote that the Indiana Star had, including a 10-year-old victim of incest who needed an abortion. The newspaper ran with that. It got picked up all around the country. As I said, President Biden used it in a speech.
By the way, we've got that story linked up for you at BillMick.com on today's show page in the commentary from Dave. So give that a look.
So here was a case where the media presented a story that included the fact that a doctor in Indiana said this. But nobody bothered to check the doctor's story and say, okay, did this really happen? And because of HIPAA laws, nobody can, dig into records. No
verification of the facts in play, right? Okay.
But the Washington Post, God bless them, I guess in a fit of journalism, decided to go, wait, this would be a great story. This would fit our agenda, but we better make sure it's true first. And they decided, because, everything that happened with the Washington Post a few weeks ago, they decided, well, we better make sure this one's true first. So they went off and tried to find this story. And what they found was that it was in fact true that the Indiana Star reported that a doctor in Indiana said that there was a 10-year-old patient from Ohio. But they couldn't find the 10-year-old patient from Ohio. They can't find any criminal record of a 10-year-old being assaulted and made pregnant. Nobody can find anything about this. And so the Washington Post actually said, look, we just don't even know if this is true or not, but we can't verify it. So what happens when the media says that? Did anybody even notice the fact that the WAPO fact-checked a story that it had picked up itself and said, here, this may not be true? Or are we still talking about this 10-year-old that was incestually assaulted, made pregnant, and needs an abortion in a state that doesn't allow abortions, and so had to travel this dangerous journey from Ohio to Indiana
in a Conestoga wagon?
Exactly. So
give them credit for checking it. I mean, the folks at CNN are trying to make a play for their credibility. No more breaking news with every story and trying to move to journalism. I talked about I would be optimistic about that if I thought they could do it, but it's going to take them forever to recover a reputation if they go that way.
I would be optimistic if conservatives stopped putting on every post, this changes everything. It's the same thing as breaking news. It doesn't change anything.
Exactly. Let me get you a call in before we move on, Dave. Good morning. You're on Bill Mick Live. What are you thinking here?
Hey, guys. This is Keith, the other Keith in Palm Bay.
Yeah.
I've gone through an evolution where they went from the mainstream news to the lamestream news to the fake news, and now I call them the fake news paparazzi. They're basically paparazzi to me. But anyways, getting that back on the subject, CNN, I'm glad I called. Unless you change Wolf Blitzer, CNN's never going to have a face change. But anyways, I prefer it this way. I like it this way. A lot of other people, I watch CNN and I watch MSNBC and I watch CNBC. Fox News business, I get more politics than business, really. But anyways, I've learned, if I learned anything from Rush Limbaugh, is they will tell you exactly what they're doing. You have to listen to it. You have to listen to it and know their strategies and everything else. I like it this way. I think that media, the news goes in cycles too. And I think since, what's his name with the Vietnam, the emotional thing for ending Vietnam, ever since then, a lot of the journalists learned that using emotion can get their agenda. And now it's gotten so obvious. That's why CNN's trying to make the change to getting back to real news.
Okay, that's interesting, Keith. I got to let you go because we have to wrap the show up. But I'm glad there's somebody else interested in seeing him get back to it. Dave, got a minute and a half to wrap it up. Go for it, son.
It's easy to say it's the other side doing this. They're doing this for the other side. But my favorite history professor tells this, he has this mantra about history that I'm going to apply here to media. And what Keith there said about, I like it this way because I have to think for myself. I wish more people would see it that way. Because if everything you hear on your newscast or in your news feed fits your agenda perfectly, in other words, it tells you exactly what you want to hear all the time, it's not news, it's propaganda. And if you can't figure that out, well, you're really no different than the people who said we need to go to war against Spain or these British soldiers murdered people. You're the same American, and you're being treated the same way, even though you think it's your side, so it must be okay.
Dave Bowman, well done. Thank you, my friend. I enjoy these Tuesdays. Understand we're going to be off next week. You're going to be away next week. Safe travels to you. Hope the trip goes as well as it can, and be safe. I understand it's a longer trip than you thought it used to be.
Yeah. It's a 6-day journey there and back, and it didn't used to be that long.
Yep. Dave Bowman, thanks. I appreciate it. Always good to have you along, my friend. The McPherson Financial Group made the hour possible. Catch the podcast if you missed